I was steadying the roast pan in both hands when I caught Genevieve leaning over to Lyle, murmuring something about how the meat looked dry. Her voice was that usual deadpan of hers, the kind that doesn't sting at first because it sounds more like an observation than a dig. I didn't react. I just kept slicing. She'd specifically asked for roast beef this time, said she wanted it medium rare, but with no pink. Her exact words. And now, apparently, it was too dry. The kids were glued to their phones as always, the twins yelling back and forth about some video they watched online. Lyle was topping off his glass of wine, offering Genevieve help with setting the table, like he didn't know I'd already done that an hour ago. I moved around them quietly, filling the mashed potatoes, tucking the napkins back where they belonged. Not that anyone noticed they'd fallen. I caught a glimpse of myself in the sliding glass door. Soft sweater, hair pulled back, apron still tied. I looked like the kind of grandmother who volunteers on Tuesdays at the church kitchen. The type folks smile at in the grocery line, but couldn't describe if you asked them later. Genevieve brushed past me to grab a serving spoon, didn't even glance my way, like I was in her path instead of part of her day. Lyle gave her a warm smile, the kind he used to flash at me when he couldn't tie his shoes. Now I'd earn that smile if I happened to cook the beef just right. They were hosting the dinner, sure, but it was still my ingredients, my hands, my food, while they slept through brunch and wandered through the farmer's market like it was a photo op. I had spent the morning chopping, mixing, and seasoning. No one asked me to, of course, but if I didn't do it, no one would. That's how it goes with family routines. You do something enough times, and folks just start thinking it's something you were born doing. I took my usual seat at the end of the table, closest to the kitchen. No one looked up when I sat. No one said a word. The conversation rolled on like I wasn't even there. Genevieve went on about her new yoga instructor. Lyle started rambling about his app's beta launch. I watched them laugh, clink glasses, tear pieces of bread, and dip them into the gravy I had made from scratch. The only moment they paused was when the youngest dropped a fork, and I bent down to pick it up. And right then, for not the first time, I thought how easy it is to disappear right in the middle of your own family. Let me ask you something. Ever hosted a dinner, cooked every dish, cleared every plate, and still felt like the unpaid help in your own home? You might want to stick around for what came next. Because what they didn't realize, all dolled up and full of smiles at that table, was that I had already made up my mind. That night was going to be the last meal I ever cooked for any of them. The gravy had cooled. The plates were mostly cleared. The kids had wandered off to the den, leaving behind half-drunk juice boxes and sticky fingerprints. Genevieve was stacking leftovers into containers with a sudden burst of interest, like she'd just discovered what helping looked like. Lyle leaned against the kitchen counter, nursing the last of the wine, his shirt hanging uneven, half untucked like it had given up halfway through the evening. I stood at the sink, rinsing pans, trying not to make noise. The house was so still that even a drawer opening sounded like a warning. Then I heard it, the soft scrape of the silverware drawer. Not the one in the island, no. It came from the built-in under the microwave. I turned my head, just a little. Genevieve was standing there with the drawer half open, her brow furrowed, her fingers clutching a yellow envelope I hadn't laid eyes on in months. She turned it over slowly, like she wasn't sure if she should read it or pretend it hadn't been there at all. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked toward her. She stepped back slightly, acting casual, like she'd picked up a grocery list. I didn't say anything. I just took the envelope from her hand. It was a thick statement from a private legal trust, tied to a settlement from years back, a class action I had quietly joined when no one thought women like me had any reason to sue. Back then, nobody listened to court reporters with complaints. Nobody thought we had anything worth fighting for. But enough of us spoke up. Enough of our stories matched. Eventually, the silence cracked, and a number appeared. 21 million. The check hadn't come, just the paperwork. It showed up in the mail 3 months ago. I read it once, then slid it under some old appliance manuals. Didn't hide it. Just didn't put it on display either. Genevieve didn't ask what it was. She didn't have to. Her eyes moved from the envelope to my face, then flicked toward Lyle, calculating something I wasn't supposed to notice. I stood there waiting, but she said nothing. She handed it back and disappeared down the hallway like nothing had happened. I set the envelope on the counter and draped a towel over it. Lyle never even looked up. He was too busy talking about some startup he was advising, half facts and half ego. I nodded where I needed to, but my hands felt damp again, even though I had dried them twice already. Later, when I packed my overnight bag, I noticed Genevieve had left her laptop charging near the guest bed. A document was open on the screen. It was called Household Budget 2024. I didn't touch it, but I saw my name listed in one of the rows, under contributions. It was the first time it hit me my place in their world wasn't as a person anymore. I was a figure in a spreadsheet, a resource. And after what she saw in that envelope, I knew she wouldn't be the last one to open that drawer. Something had shifted, not just in her, in the whole house. And soon, the quiet I'd gotten so used to was going to start making noise. Breakfast the next morning felt quieter than it should have. The kids were still asleep upstairs. The dog scratched lazily at the back door like even he didn't feel like being let out. I made the coffee like I always do, 2 mugs. One for me, one left on the table for whoever came in first. Used to be Lyle, but this time it was Genevieve. She didn't say good morning. Just sat down, took a sip, and stared at her phone like it might explain what she couldn't. Her fingers moved slow, like her mind was far from here. She didn't touch the toast I had buttered and placed beside her. Lyle shuffled in a few minutes later, rubbing his neck and mumbling about stiff pillows. He grabbed a banana, kissed Genevieve on the head, and didn't wait for her to look up. There was tension in the air, but not the kind that bursts. The kind that settles quietly in corners and thickens over time. By mid-morning, Lyle offered to drive me home. I told him I'd call ride instead, said I needed some air. He pushed, lightly, but I stood firm. He nodded too fast and went off to get dressed. Genevieve watched us from the doorway. She didn't smile, she didn't blink, just watched. Before I zipped my bag, she stopped me in the hall. Her tone was calm, a little too measured. She said she hadn't meant to invade my privacy. Said she was surprised by what she found. Then, like she was reading off a brochure, she asked if I had considered setting up a trust, something to secure long-term stability for everyone. She brought up estate taxes, legacy planning, the kind of language folks copy from financial blogs without understanding. It was the first time she spoke to me like I was a client instead of family. I told her I had it handled. She gave me a polite smile, the kind that fades before it fully forms. In the car, Lyle barely spoke. He asked if I was okay. If I needed anything, I said no. I looked out the window the rest of the drive. He didn't press, but his voice had changed. It didn't feel warm. It felt measured, calculated. When we pulled up, he didn't walk me to the door, just gave a quick wave and drove off. That night, I sat at my own kitchen table and reread the letter. Still crisp, still heavy. It wasn't just about the money. It was about all the years no one saw me, all the assumptions, all the invisibility. I thought about that dinner, about bending to pick up that fork, about seeing my name in that spreadsheet under contributions. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was an asset, a line item, and I understood then being quiet had never protected me. It had trained them to see me as background noise, wallpaper. And I had no intention of being wallpaper anymore. There was going to be a conversation. But it wasn't going to happen in their house. It would start on my terms, and it wasn't going to be quiet. It started with a knock at my door 3 days later. Not loud, just 3 soft taps, followed by silence. When I opened it, Genevieve stood there alone, holding a folder, and wearing that same client-facing smile she used with people she didn't quite trust. She didn't waste time. Said she was just stopping by. Said she had something she thought I might want to look at. She held the folder out like it was neutral. No pleasantries. No eye contact. Inside was a 10-page document. Printed. Color-coded. Titled Family Asset Management and Succession Planning. Broken down by roles and responsibilities. My name showed up more than once. She didn't stay long, said it wasn't urgent, but that it would be smart to think ahead, mentioned my age, legacy, used words like stability and protection like she thought they'd land softer if wrapped in corporate packaging. Said we were all on the same team now. I nodded. Didn't say much. She left the folder on my table and promised to check in next week. I watched her get in her car, type something on her phone, and drive off without looking back. The next morning, Lyle called. He didn't bring up her visit. He talked about how busy work had been, how fast the kids were growing, how they'd been thinking about the future. Then, carefully, he eased into it. Said maybe we should have a conversation about estate planning. Said it was just practical. Said it could get complicated later if we didn't sort things out now. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up and looked at the folder still sitting unopened on my table. That afternoon, I made a call I hadn't made in over 10 years. Jody. We met back in the 90s doing deposition work. Both of us juggling courtrooms and kids, trying to stay visible in rooms where men looked right past us. She answered on the 3rd ring, older voice, but still hers. I told her I was looking for some guidance. She said she still had contacts, told me to send what I had. I scanned the settlement letter and the new proposal and emailed them over. She replied that evening with 2 names, a trust attorney and a financial journalist. I printed both. That night, I sat on the back porch with a cup of mint tea and listened to the distant hum of traffic and the creak of the swing. The document sat beside me. I read every page. Each line just confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't about taking care of me. It was about controlling me. About making my name a placeholder for someone else's security. Not out of cruelty. Out of entitlement. They didn't want me gone. Not yet. They needed me just long enough to sign what they needed signed. I closed the folder, stood up, and went inside. The hallway light clicked on automatically, cast a long shadow on the floor. I had no intention of disappearing. But they were going to find out exactly what it meant when the quiet one in the room finally stopped cooperating. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan toss shadows across the walls. Its hum ticked steady like a metronome, but it didn't calm me. The folder sat on my dresser, closed but louder than anything else in the room. I'd already read it twice. I didn't need to go through it again. What I needed was room to breathe. At 2 in the morning, I got up and brewed a pot of coffee. It came out too strong, but I drank it anyway. I stood at the window, staring out at the empty street. The glow of the street lamps stretched long over the sidewalk. All the houses were dark and quiet behind drawn curtains. Except mine. By 3, I opened my laptop. I started typing a letter not to Lyle, not to Genevieve, to myself, a declaration of sorts, a moment of clarity. I wrote down everything I'd noticed over the past few months. The way they made decisions without me. The way I'd turned into a mix of burden and bank account. How I'd gone from mom to contributor. I typed slowly, intentionally. I listed the appointments they'd made for me without asking. The prescriptions they filled without asking. The mail they always just happened to pick up, but never actually opened. It had been building. The little questions about my memory. The way they watched me repeat a story like it was a warning sign. Genevieve suggesting I write things down just in case. Then her bringing up power of attorney like it was nothing more than a safety net. And now this. A full estate plan drawn up while I was still breathing. I saved the letter and opened a new document. This one was different. It was instructions. Passwords, accounts, contact lists. This wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I didn't trust them to look out for me anymore. I trusted myself and the people I chose. I kept going until just past 5. Then I shut the laptop and folded the printout into an envelope. I tucked it inside a cookbook no one had touched in years. Second shelf. Behind the canned peaches. That morning, the phone rang. It was Lyle. His tone was calm, but too even. Said he and Genevieve had spoken with a financial planner. Just informal, he said. Nothing binding. They thought it might be good for me to meet with them. I told him I was busy. He hesitated. Said he understood, but I could hear it in his voice. That soft pressure behind practice patience. That night, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. The rooms felt heavier than usual, familiar, but no longer safe. I paused by the hall mirror and studied my reflection. Same face, same lines, but something behind my eyes had changed. I didn't look like someone waiting anymore. I looked like someone preparing, not for war, but for weather, the kind of knowing that settles in when you stop waiting for them to change and start protecting what they never bothered to see. The next morning, I pulled out my old voice recorder, the one I used during depositions back in the day. It still worked, scratched, but solid. I popped in fresh batteries, tested it once, then set it on the kitchen table next to a legal pad and a hot mug of black tea. I sat in silence for a while. Then I pressed record. My voice came out steady, not loud, not dramatic. Just mine. I said my full name, the date, the time. Then I started talking. I spoke about the letter, the settlement. How it had shown up without warning one ordinary afternoon. How I tucked it away, unsure what to do next. I described the weight of that number printed on official paper, and the heavier weight that settled in once someone else laid eyes on it. I told the story of that dinner, Of the drawer, the envelope. I talked about Genevieve's visit, her folder, her rehearsed tone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't assign blame. I just recorded the facts, one after another, like testimony. Clean, precise, documented. I ended the recording after 21 minutes. Then I made a second one, shorter this time. 5 minutes, give or take. I spoke about my intentions, where the money would go, the causes I believed in, the legal steps I was taking. I made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration. I saved both recordings to a flash drive and labeled it me archive. That afternoon, I called Jody again. She answered before the first ring even finished. I told her I was ready to meet the people she'd recommended. She gave me times, places, told me what to bring and what to expect. Then she paused, said she had someone else in mind, not a lawyer, not a planner. Someone in radio. I told her to send the contact. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. The screen was blank. I stared at it for a while. Then I typed 3 words. Not your mother's wallet. The title wasn't clever, wasn't flashy, but it was honest, and something about it felt like unlocking a door I hadn't realized was closed. I spent the rest of that afternoon drafting outlines. Not episodes, not yet. Just scenes, memories. Little moments that had sat in silence too long. At dinner, I ate alone. No TV, no music. Just the sound of my fork and the occasional clink of the glass. It was the calmest meal I'd had in weeks. That night, I backed up the flash drive, slipped it into a safety box under my bed. Then I turned off the light, sat on the edge of the bed. I hadn't spoken to Lyle or Genevieve again, but I had started speaking the truth. And the distance between those two things, it was already changing everything. Jody met me outside the building with 2 coffees in hand, and a grin like we'd just seen each other last week instead of 10 years ago. She looked older. So did I. But there was a lightness in her eyes I hadn't seen in ages. She handed me the black coffee without asking how I took it. She remembered. We rode the elevator up to the 5th floor. No sign on the door, just a buzzer and a mailbox slot. Inside was a modest studio, no flashy gear, just shelves, warm lights, and sound panels that looked like folded quilts along the walls. It didn't feel like a business. It felt like someone's passion project that had grown into something more. Jody introduced me to Claire. She used to run live storytelling nights downtown. Short gray hair, sharp laugh. A way of listening that made you want to keep going. I handed her the flash drive. She plugged it in, listened to the first 2 minutes, and nodded without looking up. She said we should record a pilot. That afternoon, we stepped into a booth no bigger than a closet. 1 mic, no script. Claire asked questions, simple ones. And I answered in pieces. She didn't push, just let me talk. I told her about the envelope, the letter, the proposal, and the moment I realized I had stopped being a person and become someone's project. When we stepped out, I felt lighter, like I'd put something down without knowing I'd been carrying it. Claire said she'd edit the pilot and upload it on a new channel. No marketing, no pressure, just to see what might happen. 3 days later, it was live. No one knew it was me. I didn't use names. Not mine, not theirs. No dates, no cities, just my voice, telling the truth. About dinners where no one looked up, About spreadsheets where I was listed under liabilities, about how silence doesn't always keep the peace. At first, the numbers were small. A few listens, then a few dozen, then a few hundred. Then it started to spread. People shared it. Someone clipped a quote and posted it to a caregiving blog. One morning, I opened my inbox to 27 messages from women I'd never met. Most older, some younger, but all of them said the same thing, just in different words. They had been there too. They had stayed quiet too. They had waited for someone to notice what was slowly being taken from them. That night, I opened a new folder, labeled it Episode 2. The title was simple, The Fork That Fell. Because sometimes it's not the shouting that breaks you, it's the moment a fork hits the floor louder than your name. And no one bends to pick it up but you. The second episode took less than 2 hours to record. I didn't pause, didn't edit. It just poured out. It wasn't planned. It was ready. I spent the following week building a structure around this voice I'd finally let out into the world. The podcast started growing faster than anyone expected. Claire called to say we'd passed 10,000 downloads. I thanked her, but the number didn't surprise me. There was something humming beneath it all, not a shout, not a storm, just a steady hum that came from finally being heard. But I hadn't started this to be heard. I started it because I was being erased. So while Claire managed the edits, and while my inbox filled with stories from women who had been carrying their silence for far too long, I turned my attention to something else. I called the trust attorney Jody had recommended. Her name was Eileen. She was clear, direct, and never once talked down to me. I sent her all my files. She read every word. The next day, she proposed we build a layered estate structure, one that didn't default power to anyone, everything documented, every step spelled out, no assumptions, no access granted unless I approved it in writing, in advance, with witnesses and a notary. Then we added one more clause. Anyone who tried to contest the trust would be removed from it entirely. I asked if that was legal. She said yes. It felt like closing a door gently and locking it from the inside. Next came the house. I met with a local realtor, told him I was open to selling, but only quietly. He understood. Discretion was part of his business. Within 3 days, we had 2 offers. By the end of the week, the paperwork was signed. Closing would happen in a month. I'd be gone before the holidays. I didn't tell Lyle or Genevieve. Instead, I mailed them each a small envelope. Inside was a brief, typed letter. Said I was making some personal changes. Said all financial and legal matters would be handled by my attorney going forward. Gave Eileen's name and number. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. No invitation for a conversation. That afternoon, I watched the mail truck drive away with both letters in its bin. The driver didn't look up. That night, I uploaded episode 3. It was called The Budget Line. I told the story of the spreadsheet I'd seen on Genevieve's laptop, how my name was listed under contributions, how the layout made it clear I was no longer a person, just potential, just value to be measured. I spoke slowly, without anger, just clarity. And I ended with this: you can give your life to people and still end up as a placeholder. But when you take it back, when you claim it completely, the silence they counted on starts to crack. And that's when the real noise begins. The first call came from an unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. It was Genevieve. Her voice was tight, clipped at the edges. She said she'd received my letter. Said she respected my decision, but she had some concerns. Asked if I could call her back to clarify the changes. She didn't mention the trust, didn't bring up the house. The second message came the next morning. This time from Lyle, softer, less polished. He said he hadn't realized things had drifted so far. Said he missed talking to me. Said he hoped I wasn't making decisions I'd regret. I let the message play through, then I deleted it. By the end of the week, the calls slowed, then they stopped. Claire called me instead. Episode 3 had passed 50,000 listens. Women's newsletters were linking it. A caregiving podcast replayed a clip. Message boards for retired nurses, single mothers, even financial independence groups had started to share quotes. Something had cracked open, not loud, just wide. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store. In the frozen aisle, I noticed a woman staring at me a little too long. She didn't speak. She just nodded once and walked away. That night, I recorded a new episode. Not a long one, more of a letter, really. A thank you to the women who had written to me. I didn't use names, just read their words with their permission. One woman said she'd left her son's house, moved into a tiny apartment with a single window that got morning light. Another said she'd stopped wiring money to her grown children each month. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in years, she could hear her own voice again. The next day, Lyle showed up at my door. I didn't let him in. He stood on the porch in his work clothes, holding a coffee cup he never drank from. Said he didn't understand what was happening. Said I was acting like a stranger. Said he didn't want things to get ugly. I told him everything was already in motion. If he had questions, he could contact Eileen. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward. But something in his eyes shifted, like he realized he no longer had a foothold. When he left, I sat in the same chair I'd used the night that envelope first arrived. I opened my laptop. There was a message waiting. A producer from a national radio program wanted to talk about syndication. About stories from older women who'd never been handed a mic. I read the email twice, then closed it. That weekend, Genevieve made her move. She posted a long message on a private family group page. Said she was worried about me. Said I'd been forgetful, paranoid even. Implied I might be under pressure from outside influences. She didn't name names, didn't make direct accusations. Just left enough breadcrumbs for people to start wondering. I didn't respond, but I already had the next episode drafted. Episode 4. It was called The Kindness of Concern, and it opened with a single sentence. They never cared about my silence until I used it. Then they called it confusion. The envelope came on a Tuesday. No knock, no doorbell. Just slipped under my door like someone hoped I'd step on it before I noticed it. Pale blue, no return address. The handwriting was Lyle's. Neat, slanted just a little to the left, like how he used to write his name on school folders. I didn't open it right away, left it on the counter while I finished my tea. Folded a load of laundry, watered the plants on the porch. Only when the house had settled into its usual quiet did I sit down and slide my finger under the flap. It was 2 pages, no apology at the top, just a memory. He wrote about being 10 years old and watching me testify in court. Said I looked taller that day. Said the whole room felt like it shifted around me. He remembered feeling proud but also afraid. Because I looked powerful, and he didn't understand that yet. He said he'd been thinking about that version of me, The one who took the stand. He said he never meant to reduce me to numbers in a spreadsheet. Said he didn't realize how far things had drifted. Said maybe he'd allowed it. Maybe he'd even encouraged it. Said silence made things easier, and comfort turned into entitlement before he noticed. There were no excuses, just admissions. He wrote that Genevieve was scared, that she felt exposed. But that wasn't a reason either. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask to meet. He said he saw what I was doing, not just with the trust, but with the voice I'd found and helped others find. And then he wrote one line that didn't fit with the rest. He said, "I never knew you were lonely." That was the only sentence I read twice. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not hidden, not displayed, just stored. That evening, I went for a walk around the block. The breeze was light. Someone 2 houses down was grilling. The smoke drifted soft and clean. When I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote down the title for episode 5, The Letter I Didn't Expect. I didn't record it that night. Instead, I sat by the window and let the silence stretch out a little longer. It felt different now, not empty, not waiting, just mine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to say anything out loud, not because I had nothing left to say, but because, for once, someone had spoken in my language. And they hadn't asked to be forgiven, they just wanted to be heard. Genevieve emailed the following Thursday. No subject line, no greeting, just a single paragraph that read more like a press release than a message between 2 people who'd shared hospital rooms and holidays. She said she'd been reflecting, said she'd listened to the episodes, said she admired the courage it took to speak out. Then came the part she wanted me to notice. She proposed an idea, a collaboration. Said it would be powerful to include multiple perspectives. Said the podcast could reach more people if it told both sides of the story, hers and mine. She pitched it as healing, a way to rebuild, a bridge. I read the email 3 times. The wording was polished. She'd done her homework, mentioned audience growth, media interest, the trend of second act storytelling. She understood the language that producers respond to. She even referenced the episode about the spreadsheet, but she never mentioned the envelope, never acknowledged what started all of this. She said she was willing to be honest, willing to be vulnerable, willing to admit where things had gone wrong. She attached a voice memo. I didn't open it. Instead, I replied with a single sentence. I told her that what I had created wasn't a platform for branding. Then I logged out of the account and closed the laptop. That evening, I didn't record. I didn't write. I sat on the back steps with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and listened to the wind moving through the trees. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler turned on. The sky shifted from gold to gray. My tea sat beside me and went cold. Genevieve's proposal didn't shock me. Didn't even disappoint me. It confirmed what I already knew. Some people apologize by finding a better angle, a softer light, a way to stay visible in the frame. But not everything needs to be repurposed. Not every fracture should be fixed by the same hands that caused it. When I went inside, I deleted the email. No announcement, no reply, no counteroffer, just a quiet decision. I hadn't told this story for reconciliation. I told it for release. And now the same woman who once brushed past me at my own dinner table wanted to stand beside me like she'd always known. But silence has a weight, and I had learned how to carry mine with dignity. There was no space in this voice for performance, only truth. And once truth finds its form, it doesn't leave room for reenactments. I moved out quietly just as the realtor said I could. The closing happened sooner than expected. The boxes were marked with thick black marker and stacked neatly in the back of a plain moving van. No logos, no fuss. I left the keys on the counter. No note. No forwarding address. The new place is near the water. Tucked behind a bend in the coast where the air smells like salt and cedar. It's smaller, simpler, one floor. No attic full of old papers. No stairs for anyone to whisper up or down. Mornings begin with birds I never learned the names of. Afternoons drift by with half-read books and teacups that never quite get emptied. I don't miss the echo of expectations filling every room. I record once a week now. The podcast has become something I never planned for. Women send letters from towns I've never heard of. Men write too, sometimes quiet, sometimes embarrassed, wanting to know how to listen better. I keep their printed messages on a shelf in my office. Not to display, just to keep. Claire checks in regularly. She says the audience wants more. Syndication offers are piling up. Panel invites. Book proposals. I nod. I thank her. And I tell her maybe later. For now, I prefer the booth. I prefer the slow way of telling. The latest episode was only 10 minutes long. I read from a letter I wrote years ago, but never mailed. Not a manifesto, just a memory. When it ended, I left a long pause. Sometimes silence says more than anything else. I haven't spoken to Genevieve since. Lyle sent one more message. Short, kind, no pressure, no plans. Just said he hoped the coast was as peaceful as I wanted it to be. I didn't reply, not from anger, but from completion. Some stories don't end with explanations. They end when there's simply nothing more that needs to be said. And here, in this small house by the ocean, I've learned the difference between being alone and being free. Freedom is quiet, but it isn't empty. It's filled with the voice I thought I had lost, and I intend to keep using it. If this story found you at a time when your silence feels too loud, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You can write me. You can record your own note, or you can sit in your quiet and let it speak back to you first. Either way, your voice matters. And whenever you're ready, it's here waiting, just like I was.